G'day guys, welcome back. Today I am going to, compare the Phoibos Great White. So on the left here, the Phoibos Great White PY007, this model in black. So this is the C model, and this was originally provided by Phoibos Watches. So again, a shout out to them for that particular provision. And on the right here, I have, of course, the Seiko SKX007, a watch that I reviewed a while back. Really something I purchased quite a long time ago now, but has been in regular rotation through my channels, through my collection and my wrist. And I've taken off the original bracelet and rubber strap that it came with, of course, and this is now sitting on the Alpha Shark NATO, the Bond NATO from Alpha Shark here. So there we have it. That's the Seiko Divers 200 meter SKX007. So why am I choosing these two? Well, it's because they are roughly around the same price point, around the $200 to $300 mark is what they are. They are both very good dive watches. The Chinese dive watch on the left is around the $280 mark, but it does drop down sometimes when they have sales. Versus the Japanese brand, the Seiko, on the right, which is $200 mark, 210 I think it's what it goes for currently, at least last time I checked on Amazon, for example. The MSRP is slightly different, of course. This one is $400 MSRP versus $450 MSRP originally, as far as I can tell. But of course, you don't pay MSRP. But going by that, they're roughly the same price, very similar anyway. They're both with 316L steel, of course. They both have screw-in case backs, as you can see there as I turn them around. And they both have screw-in crowns for proper dive water resistance. But they're slightly different. This one's a 200 meter. This one is rated at 300 meter on manufacturer testing. Unidirectional 120 click dive bezels, of course, on both, and they have both pretty good lume. This one is actually a Super Luminova, not C3, but I think it's C1, and this one is of course the Seiko LumiBright, which performs very well. So can the relative newcomer, the Chinese newcomer, take on the cult favorite that is the Seiko SKX? So let's get into it and go through the traditional 10 categories that I've used throughout my comparison videos since over a year ago, really. So caliber, let's talk about that first. Now, the Phoibos has the Miyota 9015. So this is 28,800 beats per hour versus the Seiko, the 7S26, which is getting on in terms of its age. I think that's slowly starting to phase out through their collection, going towards the 4R movements, I think, in a lot of equivalent watches now. So this is getting on in ages, 21,600 beats per hour, 42 hours versus 40 hours in reserve, 24 versus 21 joules. The Miyota movement is, I think, more up to date. It certainly hacks and hand winds, whereas the Seiko does neither of those. It doesn't hack, it doesn't hand wind. I think there's absolutely no question. You've got to give the nod to the Miyota 9015 when comparison directly to the 7S26. So 8 versus 7 is what I've gone. I don't think that's any controversy in this category at all, even though that has a very long track record of reliability. Just spec-wise, you have to give the nod to the Phoibos. Okay, design. Now, the Phoibos, right, they're both very functional divers. The Phoibos really is an homage design, of course. It's a Rolex sub-homage. I've spoken about this in length in various other videos. It is very well executed, right? But, a lot of the cues have been taken from the Rolex. But in terms of dive design, look, they've gone for Super Luminova. They've put sapphire glass on top. They've put a unidirectional 120 click, very well executed bezel with a ceramic insert, and it functions perfectly well. In my example, at least, it's pretty well fitted. It's tight, it's very well finished, and I have no qualms about the design here. I've just knocked off some marks because a lot of the looks and overall shape and case, right, is lifted from Rolex. So I've given 7 for the Phoibos, whereas the Seiko, of course, is its own design, right? It's this kind of like cushiony type of case, very nicely curving on the sides here. Very solid dive design, right? A bezel that I think admittedly is slightly looser these days. It's getting on in age. I think the Phoibos does feel tighter, but this is absolutely perfectly functional, minimal play here. And, it's got really, really good lume, and it's really overall a legendary original design, really very much loved here. So I've given the nod to the Seiko 8 for the SKX and 7 for the Phoibos. Both very good, but, I think I've given the nod to the Seiko here. Okay, next, quality. Now, I think it's difficult to separate the fit and finishing overall. I think mine is pretty well finished, but Phoibos does have its issues. People have complained that the finishing on the lugs as well as the end links, the brushing are subpar. And I think if you look very closely, you might see some issues cropping up. Certainly in other people's models, they say you can see it with the naked eye. I think mine is hard to complain, hard to pick, but it's not the finest finishing. I think the transition between polished and brushing is pretty good. And my bezel in particular is seated pretty well, but people again have also complained about the bezel seating being not quite flush, and they have their QC issues, and it's pretty consistent. I've given lots of comments about that, so I think that is obviously a very consistent problem that they're having. But marking it on mine, I think it's pretty good, right? And even with those issues, well, they've thrown in a sapphire glass, they've thrown in a ceramic bezel. I think quality-wise, they're pretty good. Seiko, I think does has slight issues, right? Very, very minor play on the bezel. And, it is not quite up to par in overall materials, right? It's aluminium bezel with the mineral glass that Seiko Heartlex represents. And then the bracelet, I've shown this on previous videos, the bracelet that it comes with is rather poor. Seiko bracelets, people do, I guess, point out is a weak point in their divers, which is why I've swapped it out. I'm not even going to show that. I've just put it on this Alpha Shark from BluShark. So, I've given an 8 and not mainly to the case quality here. So there's problems with both, but I've given 8 to both. You could give 7 to both. I think they're pretty much on par. Okay, next, style. Phoibos is, of course, borrowed from Rolex, right? This is the most subjective category here, but, this is completely taken from Rolex sub. I think it's pretty well made. I think the style is pretty good, but I've knocked off a point because it is a copy. So 7 for the Phoibos, whereas the Seiko, very, very well-liked original design, almost legendary cult status. As you look at it, those hands, that dial with the type of markings that they've implemented, the bezel design. It's really very well known. I don't have to speak much more about that. I've given 8 to the Seiko as in terms of this category, and I've stuck with point off for the Phoibos, 7 for style for the Phoibos here. Right, performance. Okay, I think they're both obviously going to perform for most of us. You're not going to take this down to 300 meters, or at least most people won't. And if you do, it may well fail because that's the limit. And dynamic spikes in pressure and whatnot, it may well fail. You wouldn't trust this to go to super depth, but I think for most of us, typical scuba diving, 30, 40, 50 meters, I don't think that would be a problem. So I think it will perform. It obviously has a very nice bezel, and I've showed that. And it's got fair lume, it's got applied super luminova, which performs perfectly well as far as I've tested it in the dark through most of a night. But I have to give the nod to the Seiko here, even though this is 200 meters, it is ISO 6425 certified. It definitely has better performing lume, and that's a function of the amount that is applied. This is one of the best lume watches I have, short of something like my Oris Aquastate. This is absolutely excellent, and I think clearly it is overall a better tool watch. So performance, you have to give the nod to the Seiko. So 8 for the Phoibos, 9 for the Seiko in this category. Versatility. So another par here, like they're both, of course, as you look at it, black and white style. So, they kind of don't call too much attention to themselves. They're quiet, relatively speaking, for tool watches. And, they have the lug design here, which allows you to easily swap them out for other straps, leather if you really want to. And obviously, I've already put a NATO on this. I think they're both able to be used in various different situations. I've worn both in work environments. In my work, where I wear shirts and ties, I think they fit absolutely fine. Nobody's going to question, the look and versatility of these watches in that range of users. And of course, they are sports watches, right? You can use them on the beach and they look equally at home there. All right, 8 for both on versatility. Okay, moving on, durability. They're both very well-made cases, right? I don't think, if it was just based on the case design, case durability, I would give them the same mark. But, the Phoibos is slightly more solid. It's got a heavier case compared to side-by-side directly to the Seiko, and they've thrown in sapphire with ceramic bezel insert. So I don't think this is very controversial. I have to give the durability mark here to the Phoibos. It does have the upgraded materials here, and it's got more material in the case as well. So I don't think this is too controversial. 8 for the Phoibos, slightly down for the Seiko at 7. Okay, value. Now, this is unchanged from previous marks. I do really think that Phoibos is unparalleled in value, right? They 10 out of 10 for the $250 odd that you pay for this watch. I think you're not going to get equivalent value anywhere else, or at least not that I've seen. 28,800 beats per hour, sapphire, crystal, ceramic insert, pretty damn good quality finishing, 300 meter water resistant, a bracelet that is pretty fair. Yes, it's got push pins, but finishing wise and implementation pretty fair for the price point. I don't think it's very difficult to beat this. People talk about the Tissot diver, the marine diver, and that one may just edge ahead, but it's very, very difficult to find better value than the Phoibos, and I'm going to leave that at 10 out of 10. I think the Seiko is excellent, for what you get, for the company name, for the history, for the design and the execution. I think you're getting a lot, but it is mineral glass, it is aluminium, right? It does fall back slightly. The movement I don't think is as good as the Miyota 9015. Still, it's 9 out of 10 for me in terms of paying $210 for what you get on this watch. So that's what I've put the spread at, 10 for the Phoibos and slightly down for the Seiko, yet it's still very good. I just think that the Phoibos is as yet unbeatable in terms of all the watches I've come across. Right, brand. You could argue a bigger spread, and people have criticized me a bit for what marks I've given to the brand, but I've stuck with 6 for Phoibos because whilst they're a newcomer with essentially no history, I think they really show a great amount of promise and integrity in terms of what they're doing. I do want to look forward to what else they will come up with. This is obviously an homage, but they've started coming up with original designs. So, I'm not going to give it a lower mark. People want me to give 0 or stuff like that, 5 as a mid-range. I've stuck with 6 because I think they lift their head up above a lot of the other startups that I've seen. One of the better startups, I have to say. So I've stuck with 6 for the brand, the company, for Phoibos. Seiko doesn't need any introduction. Some people want me to give 10, but to me 10 means there's no better company, no better brand in the world, and I just don't think that's the case with Seiko. I think they're really up there. And you could argue give it a 9. I've stuck with 8, and I've given 8 for Seiko in many other comparisons. I don't think I would ever give Seiko lower than 8. They do have so much history, so much contribution to horology, but I don't think they're the best company ever. They're not the world-beating name that some other companies may be. Certainly, they do some very excellent pieces. Grand Seiko, if you include it in the range. It equates with anything in the Swiss industry. But, you know, I think there are companies which perhaps pull a bit more in terms of brand prestige. And prestige is partly what this category includes. So 8 out of 10 for Seiko for me. You could give 9. I don't think I would ever agree with 10 for Seiko. Okay, so that's what it is for brand. And lastly, the intangible, the X factor. What am I going to give here? All right, look, I've given 7 out of 10 for Phoibos. That's slightly adjusted from previous opinions. I think they're bringing something quite special by pushing the limits on the price point for all the stuff that they pack into here for the $270 mark. You know, I think really they're pushing what is possible, and that's why I think they've got some X factor. Yes, the look is copied, and you could knock off some marks for that, but I think they do bring something special, which is why it's attracted my attention. Whereas I think no doubt that the SKX is close to legendary in its status, in its fanatical cult following. I'm not going to say any more. 9 out of 10 for the X factor for the SKX007 here. Okay, so what do we have on the total? Right, relatively close, but I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that I have to give the win to the SKX007 for all that it represents. You know, I think in summary, two, you know, very good dive watches. You know, they really get a lot of time from me, these two divers. I think they both obviously have the Japanese movements. The Miyota's slightly better. They have very different origins and backgrounds. The Phoibos, again, takes it on the caliber, the better movement, durability because of better materials, and overall the sheer value, I think it edges ahead. But yeah, I had to give it to the Seiko, right? It takes it on great original design, tool watch functionality, brand prestige, of course, and then the intangible cult fanatical following that backs up the X factor. So guys, that's my thoughts on these two divers, which are very good, you know, two of my favorite watches. Let me know what you think. If you own both of these, I'd like to hear your experience. If you own either of these, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this comparison. Guys, thank you again for watching. You know, if you enjoy my videos, do consider subscribing. I'm putting out new content weekly, always aiming to be objective and unbiased in all things horology. Thanks guys for sticking with me, and as always, I will catch you next time.